and welcome to the Awakening Philosophy channel and podcast. My name is Jed. This is an introduction to the channel and is the first video in the series. It's going to be the start of a read-along of Plato's Parmenides, but also it's an introduction to the channel and what exactly philosophy is, why we are focused on it in this channel, why it's so important, and why I consider it worth making a whole podcast channel about. Well, understanding what exactly philosophy is kind of the purpose and goal of this channel. Philosophy is a kind of exercise, activity, mystery. It's one of the most important, it's the most important thing we can do as human beings, which is a big claim. But also it's one of the most misunderstood things that we have. What do I mean by that? Well, philosophy has been given kind of a bad rap. There are a lot of different ideas about what philosophy is. Usually when we hear about philosophy, it takes one of two kinds of things. Philosophy is my personal philosophy, my opinion. This is what I believe. This is what I feel to be true. This is my philosophy. You have your philosophy. I have my philosophy, each to their own. And let it be, that kind of thing. Another way of understanding philosophy is what we get from academic circles, from colleges, which teaches that philosophy is kind of like a culmination of opinions, again, focused on opinions, from different old philosophers, usually old dead white guys, who've written very complicated books, a lot of very long books with a lot of long words and complicated ideas in them. That's what philosophy is. And philosophy is being able to collect a library of those kinds of books, read as many as you can, and can you use them to argue your point? You have your own opinion that you derive from these, or usually from your upbringing, and can you use these big words to prove your own opinion? Or make a case, or argue, or ultimately debate other philosophers. So these are the two kind of main ways of viewing philosophy. But what philosophy actually is kind of the inverse of that. I wouldn't say it's the opposite of that. Many things in it are opposite. But it's kind of like that is the shadow of philosophy. Philosophy does involve reading. It does involve understanding. It does involve thinking. It does involve communications. It involves self-reflection. So it involves a lot of elements that are, in those other kinds of philosophies. But there are some fundamental differences to what philosophy is and what would make philosophy so important and significant for us individually, for our relationships, and collectively in our society, but as a human race too. What makes all the difference? Well, first of all, philosophy involves a kind of growth. It's a human growth. It's the path of human development. One such development is development through the cognitive functions. In philosophy, we'll get into understanding what are the different faculties we have through which we can think and perceive. Opinions, of course, what we just talked about, is one of them, but they're a shadow of a higher cognitive function called understanding. Not understanding the way we consider it to be nowadays, but understanding that which is eternal. Philosophy posits that for there to be a physical world with the principles, with minds, with selves, with unchanging laws that govern our physical world, there must necessarily be some sort of cause for that. Philosophy, one way of understanding philosophy is following causes back to what is more primary. And what would be the cause of the physical world? We call that the metaphysical world. In philosophy, it's called the world of being, and it is the cause of the physical world of becoming. The physical world, of course, we recognize everything is in change. Everything is coming or going. Everything is growing or decaying. The physical world that we perceive through the senses of our body is always in flux. Philosophy wants to move from that, where we kind of all start as babies, seeing the physical world through our physical senses, to the world of the mind. And we get there through the functioning of our mind. Now, that realm of being non-physical, has its own kind of existence that we call pure mind. Therefore, as we have minds as human beings, we can access this realm of pure mind. And that's one of our primary goals in philosophy. To experience the realm of pure mind, that being primary, being outside of the physical world, has a kind of eternal, immortal existence. Meaning it's open to everyone, despite your opinions. In fact, the way into that realm of being is to progress from our opinions based on our physical senses through a development of our mind through something called dianoia, which is understanding but directed towards the realm of being, so that we can ourselves apprehend that realm of being. And that experience of confirming one's understanding in one's direct experience of the realm of being has a special name. We call it knowledge, but of course knowledge means lots of different things for us. So we use the Greek word nous. Now that's another key feature of philosophy that makes it interesting. Naming. The importance of naming in philosophy. Well, the language that we use is a byproduct or is influenced by our culture. I won't say byproduct because there, of course, are higher causes, more primary causes to language, but it's influenced by our culture. So, if our culture doesn't really know about philosophy, has yet to reawaken philosophy, then the framework for understanding things like knowledge, will be limited. And why do I say reawaken? Well, what we're doing here and what philosophy is and what is the human quest is a rediscovering of philosophy. Philosophy has existed, but was buried in our past. Of course, it's fun and interesting and worthwhile to go through the history of humanity to see where and when and why there was what we call a counterattack to truth and understanding, the historical, the cultural, the political influences, but also the human causes. Why do humans have something called a counterattack when truth exists or is introduced or is functioning well? That is one of the questions that we raise in philosophy. Nevertheless, because we are going back to where we left off in our philosophical development before it was shut down, we call it a reawakening. We are for ourselves awakening philosophy, for our culture awakening philosophy, but for humanity it's a kind of reawakening. Because what philosophy isn't opinions, whether it be academic opinions or personal opinions, as philosophy is normally talked about today, but it's truth. It's an understanding of truth. It's a relationship with truth and a movement towards truth through the ways that we can think, from image thinking to opinions and beliefs to right opinion to something called understanding. But we use the Greek word dianoia, because it's understanding directed towards the realm of being, to directly experiencing it in something we call nous, which is a kind of knowing, but it's a knowing that doesn't happen through our physical senses. It isn't a linear understanding, but an all-at-once apprehension of being, of truth. So it's a progression. It's a development. You could say it's an intellectual development because we are improving our intellect to get there. We are rising through the intellectual functions, capabilities. But because it includes higher states of mind or levels of consciousness or experiences of levels or dimensions of reality, we can also call it a spiritual quest. And if we take that spiritual quest along with our understanding, we can approach the spiritual quest rationally, intelligently. We don't have to hope for sudden inspiration. We don't have to have faith in some divine leader. We don't have to roll the dice and risk it with psychedelic drugs. Although they could have its uses within a system of understanding. Through philosophy, our spiritual quest involves all aspects, or the primary aspects, the higher aspects of being human, not just our states of mind, our consciousness, but our understanding too. So, because we don't have that framework, because philosophy has been fundamentally misrepresented for a very long time, we need a certain kind of language. Part of philosophy is learning a new language because we see through our language. We use our language. Our language influences us. Of course, we see that nowadays. People involved in propaganda or manipulation or debates try to reframe the language to change how we think. So we can see that, and you can probably think of, I bet you $1 that right now, whatever period of time you're listening to this, there'll be a popular social event. There'll be some sort of devastation happening or manipulation or giant scamming happening. And the people inflicting that tyranny will be trying to change the language to reframe the argument. While that applies to everyday things and social things, it also applies to our personal development. The language that we have frames the way we understand ourselves, our lives, our purpose here, why we're here, where we're going, and where we came from. The most important questions we have about ourselves and our relationships are framed by our language. So, part of this quest, part of this channel, is as we go, recognizing the difference between certain keywords that are fundamental for us as human beings, fundamental for us personally and within a society, for our understanding or intellectual development, and our spiritual or state of mind or consciousness development, both of those woven together, seeing keywords and naming them accurately, recognizing what they are. Let's take understanding. Understanding what it is within philosophy is specific to the realm of being. It's not understanding the things in changing in the world of becoming. What it isn't is, of course, scientific beliefs or rational beliefs derived from your physical senses, the way we normally talk about understanding. I understand how my toaster works. I have a set of beliefs and I have sufficient scientific understanding to recognize what makes my toaster work. And I might be an expert and have actual scientific beliefs about how electricity and toaster components work, so I can say I understand my toaster. So simple beliefs, like most of us have about our toasters, or scientific beliefs. Normally, that's what we call understanding. But of course, that's framed by a culture that has been in a counterattack against philosophy and needs to reawaken philosophy. And so we recognize what it isn't and what it is. What is understanding in the philosophical sense? Using the highest thinking that we can, most rational, logical, but not just rational and logical, because it leads us up to higher states of mind, because it's directed towards the realm of being. All of those ideas, bring them together, and we stamp a name on them. That's dianoia. Of course, it's an ancient Greek word, because where we left off our true intellectual and spiritual development was in the ancient Greek history. So that's the language we have to in. It's not in our English culture. It's not following what happened to the ancient Greek philosophers. They were killed in that counterattack. They were murdered. The libraries burnt. The philosophy banned, replaced with an obligation to have faith in what the priests tell you. So understanding and knowledge was replaced with obedience and faith and blind belief, bringing in a period of dark ages. But that's the Roman or Latin tradition, and that's where we've been evolving through in European culture, which is why if you study philosophy at school, you get a lot of European philosophers. You get Kant and Hegel and Nietzsche and all these sorts of dudes in that tradition that fundamentally lack a language of understanding philosophy. And there are reasons for that. We mentioned a few historically, but also more primarily, there's a reason why humans have a kind of counterattack to truth. And that's part of the philosophical quest too. So we learn certain keywords. That's, as we go through philosophy, we will be looking for keywords that really bring to light what philosophy is, but also defining them accurately, understanding what they are and what's their distortion, what's their misunderstanding, and what are the implications of having either. Another key way of understanding philosophy, what it is, the philosophy that's worth awakening for ourselves and for the world, is just one single word that changes depending on what culture you're from or what language you have. The. There are some cultures like this Latin culture that does not have the word the. Why is that important in philosophy? Well, this is one of the key ways of understanding the quest of philosophy. As we go philosophy, of course, it's an exercise. We are not robots. We're not cramming information into our brain so we can regurgitate it later or use it to argue with people, as it's often talked about. We are humans, which means we have states of mind, we have feelings, we have consciousness, and we are part of an evolutionary system. We are evolving. And we've been talking about today, the one of those evolutions is from the physical world to the realm of being. Of course, the physical world is where we see many things. We see, so in philosophy, the realm of being is characterized by the highest possible ideas, the things that we're actually interested. Hey, if we're going to be serious as human beings, we can talk about what are we seriously interested in? What are we interested in, and what is most important for us? What are the most important things for us to nail down and understand? Collectively, in agreement, universally, objectively, not as a matter of opinion. Things like justice. Do we all care about justice? Is it important for us to really understand the truth about justice? Not an opinion that's either right or wrong based on how much power you have to inflict suffering on those who don't agree. That's the cause of war and conflict. We recognize this. That's kind of obvious. But how important would it be to nail down the truth of what justice is? And what about what we desire? Do humans desire beautiful things? Are we attracted towards beautiful things? And what about good things? Does everything that we do as human beings, is it in search of the good? In some way. We want to eat a good sandwich. We want to see a good movie. We might engage in activity like we might go to college because we think it'll be good for us. But at the level of opinions, do we see conflicts arise when there isn't a shared collective understanding of the truth of what is good or the truth of what is beautiful, the truth of the things that we desire? Of course there is. You could say everybody does what they think is good, but the fundamental misunderstanding of the truth of the good causes our conflicts. So, what do we desire? Good and beauty. What is important for us? Justice. What about what is meaningful? The things that we do. What makes them meaningful? Is something meaningful to you when it fundamentally relates to yourself? Your self-state of mind, your self-learning, or even your self that has the state of mind, even more primary than your state of mind. These kinds of things, the self, your self-goals, your self-worth, your self-image, your self-belief, your self-state of mind. One key word that defines what's meaningful for us, for all people, is the self. So we can ask the question, what is the self? Can it be understood and known directly? The two key ideas that we've been talking about that makes philosophy. And what happens when we have false opinions or conflicting images? Or we're engaged in the other kind of philosophy where we debate, or we don't really know, we just use our learning to confirm what we, at some point in our history or some point in our early life, believed about ourselves. Warring beliefs, opinions, or images about the self. Could those things be the cause of problems? Well, we know from psychotherapy and psychology that fundamental false beliefs about ourselves have a negative impact on our self-worth, our states of mind, our ability to meet our goals. It's a fundamental cause of problems. So not only is understanding how things that relate ultimately to ourselves most meaningful, clearing up what's false about them is most significant to solving our problems. So these kinds of categories, what we most desire, what is most important, and what is most meaningful, these are the things that we approach in philosophy. The things that, if we're being honest about ourselves, make us rational. A rational approach to what is rationally most meaningful, most important, and we most desire. Now, you can make a list of those kinds of terms: beauty, justice, self. And if you can move from the sense particulars, examples of beautiful things, examples of just things, individual selves, all things we see through our senses, all use of those words as adjectives, if you can move from a beautiful thing to the beautiful, beauty itself, justice itself, self itself, now you're in the philosophical game. The movement from examples to the truth about it in itself. That's philosophy. And that's the movement from the world of becoming to the world of being. Things that can only be, you can only have opinions about, to things you can understand, dianoia, and know directly, nous. So the Latin tradition that had a counterattack against the ancient Greek tradition did not have a word "the," meaning their language fundamentally limited them from awakening their true human quest, the philosophical quest. Because they could talk about a beautiful thing or a just person, but without the word "the," they couldn't move from an adjective to a noun, from a descriptive to a substantive. And that's what we do in philosophy. We want to know the truth about things, understand them, and also confirm our understanding in direct experience by uniting or joining with the realm of being, taking our logos or understanding in our back pocket so that we can make sense of what we're seeing, integrate what we're seeing, and maybe go into greater depth in that experience, the experience of knowledge, nous. So, very, very different from how philosophy is talked about in this Latin tradition that has been the tradition for 1500 years or so. Since the beginning of something we call the Dark Ages. Everything went to crap. So that's what we're doing here. We're reawakening our spiritual heritage, our intellectual heritage, our human right, and also the human quest. Because it's something we have to engage with ourselves. It's something we do. It's something we practice. It's fun. It's like we see in video games and movies and things, we see almost all of them have some sort of main character going through a process of development, a character arc. And of course, if you're interested in screenwriting or this kind of thing, you'd recognize the hero's journey. There's been a recognition that there is a kind of archetype of stages of development that the main character, the Harry Potter, the Luke Skywalker, the main character of a video game would go through as part of his learning. And so we are positing in this game, well, even those are a reflection of the true human hero's quest. It's a mythological representation of the true hero's quest, and that hero's quest is the philosophical quest. The quest of us to develop through the cognitive functions into understanding, becoming rational, but enter into a new world. One of the stages of the hero's journey is introduction to a new world. Harry Potter has to leave his house to go to Hogwarts. Luke Skywalker has to leave the moisture farm to enter the new world of the greater universe. Frodo has to leave the Shire. So we leave what we're used to, what we're familiar with, through our direct experience, our sense of consciousness, our state of mind, but also our way of thinking. We're used to seeing through our opinions. We're used to debating opinions and image thinking and beliefs. So, because it's a kind of movement away from what we're used to, it requires certain things that we call in philosophy virtues. It requires a certain amount of courage to follow what is rationally shown as true. Of course, in philosophy, because it's not just rational the way we would normally talk about it within our 21st century way of using the word rational, because there are in philosophy, we recognize that we're more than just the body, we're more than just physical. We have consciousness, we have mind. There are spiritual experiences. These have been well documented for a very long time. There are ways of having them ourselves. There are many different yogas that are popular. Many different athletes have experienced higher states of consciousness. Near-death experiences are very well documented. Psychedelic experiences, again. different kinds of meditations, different spiritual. Because of the internet, we have access to understanding a lot about different spiritual traditions who have been exploring states of mind for a very long time. So we recognize there are different levels of states of mind, just as there are different levels of thinking, cognitive. So because we are recognizing the two are together, and our thinking has to be, for it to be meaningful, has to also relate to our state of mind, we can go from the idea of rational, a way of understanding that doesn't necessarily apply to ourselves, our states of mind, to something called the logos, which does involve higher states of mind. That is a kind of path to our evolution, through our evolution, a kind of roadmap that we can follow in our way of living and in our growth. So logos, of course, not a word we use in English. So it's another one of those key terms essential for philosophy and almost or defining of philosophy that we have to bring in a new word to use so we can see through it. The logos. Now, another thing about philosophy is it is a quest, it is an adventure, which means we can't just look up the definition of the word logos. That definition and our understanding of nous, dianoia, logos will evolve with us our entire lives. It will grow, we will see more depth in it, and to be on a quest is to hold a question. So part of this game is looking for key terms, but it's also developing questions and taking questions with us. It's not just about answers. Questions have a unique effect on us. It keeps us focused on what we're most interested in. We can polish up our questions. We can refine the amount of words we have in our questions, make it a nice little mantra or repeated phrase we can use to hold on to the question. We can use these questions in the conversations that we have with people. You meet up with a friend for coffee, you can talk about this kind of thing. But it also keeps you open and curious. That is another key thing about what philosophy is. If philosophy is something where we recognize we are here to develop, it means we have to be in some way open to inspiration, open to new insights, open to new learning, open to new experiences of new worlds as part of that hero's quest, which means we can't be blocked. And one way of being blocked is being certain. So often philosophy is involved, the way that it's taught, the shadow of philosophy, we could call it, the misunderstanding, the betrayal of our human quest by this fundamental misunderstanding, misrepresentation of philosophy. One of the ways of defining that is through certainty. Hey, if the whole reason you become a philosopher is to act certain in front of people, to give the appearance of knowing, not in the realm of being, but in the physical world, then being certain is a big part of that experience. He must be right because look how confident he is. Look how certain he is. He never changes his mind. He can't be persuaded. He must be more of a leader. He must be more knowing. Of course, in philosophy, that's part of what we learn because there is shadows. There are shadows of the good in the bad. There are shadows of the virtues in the vices. So certainty isn't the opposite. It isn't not knowing. Not knowing is a great state to be in. You can be curious. You can develop questions. You can go on the quest. But to think you know that which you don't, that's dangerous. That's the cause of our problems, especially if we are unaware of that which we are holding on to with this kind of loyalty, with this kind of devotion, this kind of unknown ignorance. Certainty. And of course, how do you get a job as a philosopher? How do you win a debate in a philosophy argument to appear certain, to be right about what you already believe. So, how can we overcome that if that's how we're taught? Hey, we are indoctrinated into this way of thinking. If you're wrong, you get punished. That's how justice works, right? Well, that's how the shadow of justice works in our physical world. If you get the answer wrong on the test, you get a bad mark. If you miss the mark, you get a detention. If you're wrong, you could be thrown in jail. Of course, this is what follows in a society that has yet to reawaken philosophy. And we don't want to treat ourselves that way. So we want to be curious about where we are missing the mark. So we want to replace that certainty, which can be a kind of mask to protect ourselves against people who are not familiar with philosophy and in the tradition of being against philosophy, because that's where we are in history. We want to replace that with something that makes us open, curious, more able to learn, more able to develop. And one key way of doing that is with a question. You're okay with not knowing if you have a question. You're curious, you're open, you're receptive. So, developing questions is a big thing. Now, of course, we want those questions not to be about physical world things. What did Tom Cruise have for lunch? That kind of thing. We want them to be about the kinds of things that we can apprehend with our higher cognitive faculties, with the spiritual evolution states of mind, the enlightenment states of mind. In other words, ideas in being, things that can be knowable. Which is why when you meditate on a question like that, because ultimately meditation, when it's not being marketed as a way of just calming down, but as a spiritual yoga, is to elevate you to a higher sense of being or a higher dimension of reality or a higher state of consciousness. Which means you have to be focused on that which is in that higher level. In other words, a question you can unite with, an object of knowing. The movement from concentration to meditation to contemplation or joining with that object of knowing, the object of your question. Which means in philosophy, our questions are about those things we pointed out that are most desired, most important, and most meaningful, because beauty, goodness, justice, and the self are knowable. They exist in that realm of being that we can apprehend, not with our physical senses, but with a different kind of sense, the sense of mind itself, our consciousness, that can turn around upon itself when directed away from the physical world of Tom Cruise's, turned away from that world of becoming into the realm of being, that sense, a sense that has, of course, it's not in our tradition, so we need to borrow a Greek word or introduce a Greek word. The word for that sense is ousia. So we're developing a list of key terms and new Greek names. So far we've got dianoia for a different kind of understanding, nous for a higher kind of understanding, nous for a higher kind of knowing, logos, balloons, for a higher kind of rationality, reasoning, and ousia for a higher kind of sense. The sense, the sixth sense, the sense of the mind that we reawaken in philosophy, that has the ability to turn about upon itself, know itself, and if it's mind knowing mind, it's a kind of purity of mind, which elevates it from the world of being, from our physical body, from participating in the physical world of becoming, to itself in its highest existence, its eternal existence. I say eternal because it's outside of time and space. Those are the dimensions of the physical world. So if it's outside of time, it must be eternal in some way. If it's outside of space, it must be immortal or not decaying or infinite in some way. Where we find not a beautiful thing, but the beauty, the justice, the good, the nouns, the things that have to primarily exist for them to be used as adjectives in the creation, in the unfolding of the physical world. That's what we're interested in with philosophy. But so, develop questions about those things is fundamental to philosophy. Very different from sounding smart or giving answers or winning debates. True philosophy, thumbs up, is very different in that sense. But hey, it's also very different in that we develop a new understanding of key terms. People are not going to like it because they're not used to it. We're taught to agree with what we're familiar with. That's how prejudices work. That's why politicians appeal to family values. They don't say what they are. They want to appeal to your personal prejudices to get you to like them. A lot of politicians are just, oh, what are you used to? Oh, make America great again. Make Germany great again. Again, what you're used to, what you're familiar with. The past is good. Nostalgia. We can recognize that as a part of our human evolution from the caveman days, where we had to survive before we developed the logos, before we developed this kind of use of our mind. We had to somehow survive in very dangerous conditions. So outside cave is bad and dangerous. Blindly obey leader. Inside cave is good. My tribe is good. Outside the cave, other tribes bad. So it had a kind of biological necessity, but now we can recognize that way of thinking severely limits us from participating, from sharing in philosophy, from sharing in two fundamental things that philosophy is engaged in: climbing that logos ladder through our cognitive functions into dianoia, preparing ourselves for nous, having that experience of being with the cognitive sense of ousia, which opens us up to knowing, discovering, and living, if we integrate it into our lives, our destiny. A path, a rational, experiential, we say intellectual and intelligible, understandable and knowable path to our destiny. But also, all the way through this talk today, we've been recognizing all of them have its shadow. The shadow of understanding, image thinking, the shadow of knowing, certainty, the shadow of cooperative conversation leading us to that which is universal and can solve problems. What's the opposite of that? Debate, conflict, fighting. The shadow of the realm of being, even, you could say, is the world of becoming. So philosophy is not just following that path to our destiny, but recognizing that path has a shadow. It has a shadow. There's a similar looking path, which has a lot of the same qualities, but have fundamental key terms in the place of the real terms that make it wrong. Hey, we still want knowing, so we still seek knowing. The only in the place of nous, we have certainty. We still want to talk, so we still have talking with our friends and sharing our insights and thinking. But in the place of dialogue, step by step, or even there's a special word in philosophy, the dialectic, the special way of talking with our friends, reflecting on an idea together, cooperatively, coming along, not leaving anybody behind. Moving from personal opinions to something that can be shared, understanding. Understanding is not personal. It's universal. It's open to all. Say, as with the experience of knowledge, it's objective. It's beauty itself. It's goodness itself. It's justice itself. It's that to which all of these fundamental ideas move. What's the opposite of that? Dialogue or dialectic that brings everyone up to a higher, more evolved, more caring, more beneficial, more rational, more closer to our destiny way of being. What's the opposite of that kind of dialogue or dialectic? Debate. yelling at each other. Turn on your television, you'll see people yelling at each other and debating. I'm right because screw you, essentially. And we can recognize that our shadow has to be something that we, if we're interested in climbing that ladder, to true happiness, to our true destiny, to being true rational beings, to entering the true human race, we have to do the work, or work isn't the right word, play the game, because it's fun, it's meaningful, it's important, it's that which we desire, it's that which is important, it's that which is meaningful, we mentioned. Therefore, it's a kind of fun game, it's a meaningful game. It has a bigger payoff than just watching another person go through the hero's journey quest when it's you, but that quest involves purifying ourselves from what is false. If it's the same kind of structure in its shadow, but there are things weighing that ladder down, pulling it to the ground, keeping us from moving upwards, we have to take those things off the ladder. Hey, don't pursue the certainty. A lot of people, you could probably recognize yourself, spend their whole lives trying to get themselves in a position in their club, in their group, in their little whatever they're interested in their jobs, where they can act certain. Their whole life has been moving towards the shadow of knowing. So often it plays out without the ability to have dialectic or dialogue to bring others up through understanding. It usually involves, what's the shadow of that? Opinions, advice, and punishing people. I'm right because I have the authority to punish you, to give the kids detention, to throw someone in jail, to commit genocide on another tribe. So, the shadow of knowing, certainty, the shadow of dialogue, or the shadow of understanding, or dianoia, opinions enforced through violence. The shadow of benefiting, caring, hurting, or punishing, somehow making the world better by inflicting suffering, violence, oppression, war. So while that plays out collectively, it also plays out within ourselves when we have problems. So we have to go through to become better human beings, because this will end up harming not just those that we have authority over, if we get into a position of authority, if we ever have kids, if we ever become a boss, if we ever get some power, but also ourselves, because we have power over our own selves. We are a master of our own soul. So we want to make sure we are not acting in that shadow way, in that harmful way towards ourselves. So we could say philosophy could be understood as that movement towards destiny, but also a purification of that which brings us to the shadow of destiny. If this is our highest goal that leads us up, what is that which we're stuck to, unaware of because we don't have knowledge or understanding? We're blind to it, but we play it out. It's negative, it's not beneficial, it's tragic, and it's repeating. It's the cause of the suffering within our lives, within ourselves, and collectively within humanity. What's that called? What is the shadow of destiny? Fate. Fate. We're here to solve problems and answer questions. We'll answer questions about both. That's why questions sit in between these two ladders, the shadow ladder on the ground and the real ladder moving up. Because it's the same sort of questions, it's the same sort of structure, and the word that we're adding in, we've got dianoia, we've got nous, we've got ousia. As these new words we're adding in, we've got logos, we can add in a fifth, dialectic. The structure of using it in a kind of way to climb the ladder, but can be applied to either. How can we not hate ourselves for having problems, not punish ourselves or beat ourselves up or imprison those with problems? No. That's not good. That's not beneficial. How can we use what we learn through philosophy to use our understanding to purify ourselves from what is ignorant, what we are problems, to surface? Of course, that's why we have questions. That same structure of asking questions and answering questions, the dialectic, instead of debate. No questions involved in debating, it's shouting opinions at each other, right? You just walk away with whatever opinions you started with, usually, if you're forced to debate for them. Competitive. So what does questions do? Well, it makes us open, it makes us interested, it makes us receptive to new learning. But also, to find a question, you have to be on a quest. You have to hunt for it. So we have to hunt for what are our unconscious, unsuspected false beliefs that are usurping the throne of the true ideas that we're learning. We have to hunt them down. So we ask questions. The same process of asking questions, looking for key terms, giving them the right name, which might involve another language, also is the same sort of thing that is needed to discover the cause of our problems. Ask questions. What are the key terms in our problems? What are the key words used when we beat ourselves up? The inner critic. What are the key states of mind that come up? The antithesis of nous. When we're troubled, when we're in our problems. So, philosophy is a kind of quest we're on. It's our destiny. It's what leads us to our destiny. It also is what we need to solve our problems. Those are the two biggies that we're here to do. So that's why I can say it's the most important thing to do. If it's that which, by definition, gives us what we need to solve our problems and reach our highest goals, to remove ourselves from fate and reach our destiny, by definition, if philosophy applies to both, is the same thing that can be used for either, then by definition, philosophy is the most important thing we can do. Therefore, understanding what it is and its shadow, what philosophy really is, the true spiritual quest, that involves not just experiencing all the stages of enlightenment, all the levels of reality, but going through understanding, not having to sit on a mat and hope, not having to pray for divine inspiration, luck, not having to take drugs and cross your fingers, but through understanding all of the states of mind, climb the ladder. Which also is helpful if you're going to help your friends, because if you know how to climb the ladder, and you just didn't get a helicopter up to the top of the mountain, you could recognize where your friends are. Oh, you're on that level of the mountain. I climbed that. I recognize that. I know the kind of questions to ask about that. Therefore, we have to know what philosophy is because it gives us both, but we also have to recognize what it isn't. Because that's going to be what gets in the way. As we talked about with philosophy itself, there is the truth of philosophy, and there is the counterattack of philosophy. Just like within us, as we go on this quest, we ourselves will have counterattacks. That's part of the human game. Which is why we do seek our destiny. One of the reasons is it gives us what we need to trigger our problems. Hey, ever noticed you get more anxious the more beautiful the person you're around? The more you have a crush on that person, the more likely you are to get into your negative state of mind. That makes you, and from that negative states of mind, it makes you more likely to act in a negative way that won't reach your goals. And you'll end up confirming your false idea about yourself being not good enough. Doesn't lead you up, leads you repeating your problems over and over again. Therefore, the more beautiful or the more meaningful your goal, the more likely it is to surface what you need, so long as you're doing philosophy, so long as you're asking questions, so long as you're looking for key terms. You've got your Sherlock Holmes hat on. We are detectives. So long as you're doing that, it gives you what you need to surface your problems so you can form a question about them, so you can address them with the true logos to purify yourself from your problems, escaping fate. That applies to all of us. Therefore, it is by definition the most meaningful thing and the most fun thing, the thing we most want. We want this. We want to be free of our problems, our fate. We want to reach our destiny. But also, we want guidance. We want to be in a community with people who are also on this quest, which is part of the reason for this channel. It's a conversation, it's a dialogue We have a Discord groups being set up. We have a YouTube community. I stream live on Twitch if you want to join in real time to ask questions. Because we want support. It's not a single person game. It's a 2 or more person game. But also, what's curious about that, if there is this logos, this rational understanding ladder upwards that we can climb to get back to the self or return home or revert to our highest state of being, then necessarily for that ladder to exist, it must have been let down. It must have unfolded. So in philosophy, we talk about there being an emanation or an unfolding and a reversion or returning. Meaning there might be a kind of logos, dialectic, conversation and guidance from a higher part of ourselves that happens through the logos. So the more familiar we get with the logos and the structure of the ladder or the dialectic, the more we will become open to something guiding us to that ladder and maybe giving us hints about the shadow ladder. That kind of communication from a guide or a friend, that's called, in Greek, again, it's a word we have to bring in because we don't really use this word, although it is kind of an English word, providence. Sharing in, becoming open to providence. So, yes, and the sorts of care and help and support comes from the community, comes from Providence, of course. And if you're interested in this channel, you can subscribe on YouTube. You can join me on Twitch. Ask questions in Twitch. Sometimes, if I'm doing an introduction for the YouTube channel, I might take a moment to get to the questions in Twitch, but I very much appreciate them, and I will get to the questions in the chat in a minute when I finish this introduction. So, what is philosophy is the quest that we're on. I've given a bit of a taster. But of course, these words and these ideas won't completely sit for you, won't completely make sense until you make them yours. That's why in philosophy we play this game of asking questions. I'm not here to give answers, I'm here to encourage questions. Maybe direct the questions, maybe create some of a background. Here are some key terms. You might not understand them, but these key terms might create a background or the preconditions for you asking your questions. It's not about beliefs or advice or ticking the right boxes on an exam. You have to make them your own. You have to ask questions. You have to. Some of what I say might stick out for you. Take the things that stuck out as most significant or more profound or more you resonate with and turn those into your questions. What the heck is this logos thing? I've never heard this before. Doesn't make sense to me. Or hey, we talk about what do we most desire? Things that are good and beautiful. All right, that's what I'm interested in. What's that desire for things that are good and beautiful? That's love. So how do I use my love to climb that ladder? Hey, if I need to climb the ladder, I have to have some inspiration or desire to climb that ladder, to reach destiny, meaning there has to be something beautiful or inspiring, something I love about this to get me into it. Otherwise, it's going to be a dry and dull thing. I'm not doing philosophy because I have to, because I'm going to get a bad grade if I don't. So how can I fall in love with philosophy? We have talked about how the realm of being contains justice and goodness and beauty. So the more that we can see into the nature of not a beautiful thing, but beauty itself, the beauty of that might overpower any other beautiful thing you might be inclined to pursue in your life, which gives us the name philosophy. Philosophy is a Greek word that means philos sophia, love of wisdom. That wisdom, Sophia, is again a word we have to change because, again, our culture has to reawaken philosophy. So our idea of wisdom is very different from the true idea of wisdom. But understanding the true idea of wisdom can help us understand why this quest, this human quest, the most important thing that we can do, and the most tragic thing if it's misunderstood or misinterpreted, why is that called philosophy? Why is that a love for something? And the thing that we love is wisdom. Don't we love that which is beautiful? So, this brings us to another key point about what philosophy is. If there is some sort of logos, some way of surfacing these questions and giving us what we need to answer them, to create our own understanding, our own hypotheses that we carry with us the same way we carry with us our questions, so that eventually we can move from that concentration on our question to a focused concentration or meditation on that question, to the contemplation or the direct joining, the nous or the ousia, with the object our question was on. Where do we find this? Where do we find the material to direct our attention to when we start? Where do we get the logos from? Where do we learn this logos? Yes, I recognize we have to uncover within ourselves the shadow versions, but what's the true version? What's the true paradigm against which I can judge my unconscious false beliefs? Or the shadow of philosophy. Hey, I hear a lot of philosophers and scammers on YouTube and on TV and at schools. What's the true paradigm against which I could recognize that which falls short? A lot of people get disillusioned with philosophy because they go in and then they just bombarded. They just get spaghetti thrown in their faces. Hey, here is a million different books. Here are a million different old dead white guys usually, and what they thought about the world. They're all different. Some of them more crazy and stupid than others. Usually they use very big, long words that are hard to access yourself. So there's already gatekeeping there. And it's written in an old English language that's hard to comprehend. But hey, we're not going to tell you what to do with them. They're just a whole bunch of opinions. Figure it out. Very disillusioning. Very off-putting. Very stupid. Why? Without the paradigm, without some sort of coat rack to hang all of these coats on, what are you going to do? You're just going to end up with a whole bunch of coats piled up on your bed at the party. So it's a good question. So where do we get the paradigm against which we can realize, oh, this particular human being reached this stage of the ladder, this stage of his understanding and state of mind, his vision and his ability to understand his vision. But also he was on this stage of his shadow ladder. He had this problem. This guy keeps attacking this country. This guy keeps defending this religion he was brought up in. Of course, it's not a blame game. It's simply seeing the truth. That's another thing about philosophy. Seeing the truth of what is without interpretation. Philosophy is a game of moving from personal interpretation to seeing the truth. Which is difficult because when we go to school, we're often told, hey, what do you think this book means? What do you think the author was saying? What does this movie mean to you? Artists often say, they ask, oh, what does this lyric mean? Or what does this title of your album mean? Well, it means whatever you want it to mean. Blech. That's not going to get you anywhere. Imagine going in and learning how toasters work and learning how to fly a plane. What does this lever on my plane mean? What do you think it means? What does it mean to you? We wouldn't allow that. That's nonsense. Your plane would crash. To me, this button means. But for some reason, in spirituality, in philosophy or understanding, and in politics, we allow that kind of craziness to happen, that fundamental irrationality. What is it? Interpretation. What's interpretation? Adding to what's there what isn't. Oh, if I push this button, it means that Jesus wants me to X, Y, and Z. No. If you push that button, the landing gear is going to come down and it's going to make the plane crash. You can't add something into that isn't there. That's interpretation. Also, you can't leave out what is there. Selectively leave out the things that you don't agree with already. And of course, this is how most people read. It's how we're taught to read. So in philosophy, we're learning to read in a new kind of way to see what's there. And of course, the times in which we engage interpretation, we're not climbing the true logos. So it will give us information about our shadow. So we're learning this fun game of reading what's there while also feeding ourselves, mining nuggets of gold about what we are missing the mark on. So we can ask the same questions. What was the nature of the interpretation? When did it come up? At what point in the logos did it come up? So that's part of philosophy, seeing things as they are and reading things as they are, because the question we're asking now is, where do we get this logos? Where do we get this paradigm? Where do we get these new key terms? What do we look at with our Sherlock Holmes hat to find puzzles, to discover questions? To challenge ourselves to read without interpretation. And if we can't read this text, we will get the interpretation, which we can take a note of and go on the other journey with our friends to discover why we were interpreting. Where do we get this? So that's the question. What texts do we read together that themselves share in the logos for us to play this game? Well, we talked about the counterattack to our birthright, our spiritual and intellectual tradition, to the most meaningful thing any individual or society can do: philosophy, true philosophy. Not philosophy the way it's thought of today as one among many different opinions. It's not a manyness, it's a single thing. Just like gravity is a single thing. Doesn't matter what your opinion is of gravity. If it's true, then it's just true. Same thing for philosophy. So we be a bit careful when we use the word, because often it means opinions. It's not. So when we say this philosophy, it's like, oh, whose philosophy? No, the philosophy. Not from a particular, an adjective. Oh, philosophy is a word I'm using as an adjective to describe this opinion and that opinion and that opinion. To the substances, the noun. From a beautiful thing to the beauty itself. A just person to the justice itself. Same thing for all of the most important ideas. Same thing for philosophy. Not a philosophy among many. What is the philosophy? What is the true way of evolving intellectually and intelligibly? Understanding and states of mind. Dianoia and nous. What is the truth of that? So that we can perfect ourselves, become rational, join the human race, become beneficial to others, help people, not harm people because they don't happen to be at your level of whatever or your personal opinions. Recognize the influences of the shadow and how that's caused by a my tribe good, outside tribe bad. We call that today in-group, out-group. We see that's what motivates most people. That's how we're manipulated by society as a whole. Politicians say, oh, the immigrants or that country or our country first. Nationalism, racism, even sexism is a kind of us versus them. Inside cave good, outside cave bad. Triggering fear. Oh, on the outside of the caves, no, we don't want fear. We don't want this. We don't want ourselves to be manipulated, and we don't want to play out the implications of that kind of ignorance and manipulation, while recognizing it has a cause. Again, it's not a blame game. We're not saying this way of thinking is outside the cave and then therefore bad and worth destroying. We will purify it through understanding. Yeah, there was an evolutionary a reason for this kind of way of solving a problem before we developed the ability to participate in logos, in dianoia in nous, in reflection upon ourselves or ousia. All of these key defining words before we were able to share in philosophy, that did serve a kind of evolutionary problem solving function. But it no longer works. We've outgrown it. We have to evolve to the next level, of course, because we don't want to suffer. We are here for a limited time as individuals. So therefore, we want to do what we can and not be pushed around to be by ignorance or fear. We want to purify ourselves from our problem, escape our fate, find our destiny in the time that we have. But also humanity needs to. Humanity is on a crash course with its fate, destruction of the planet, and just through perpetual exploitation for my cave good, billionaires good, working class bad, or our country good, that country or that religion or that tribe bad. Us four ruling companies good, everybody else we can exploit and just let them die and torture and abuse and exploit them until eventually all human species comes to an end or the planet dies. Either way, we're propelling ourselves towards the implications of that shadow. Which is another important thing about philosophy. The way we think matters. One of the ways of dismissing true philosophy is to say nothing matters. Allow everyone to believe whatever the heck they want. Because people don't act on their beliefs. But we would never allow that. Don't allow a pilot to believe that pushing that red button is good when it's going to blow up the cockpit. We wouldn't allow that anywhere else. Because it's insane. Of course people act on their way of thinking. Of course people are manipulated by their prejudices. Of course people act on their ignorance. So this idea, just allow any religion and any way of philosophy and any spiritual thing and any way of governing and any way of treating the planet and other human beings. Hey, my religion says it's okay to commit genocide. Well, it doesn't matter if that's what you're used to, if that's your cave good, outside cave bad way of thinking. Philosophy recognizes to solve problems we need to understand the truth. We all do at some level. Philosophy is just applying that rational way of being. Of course, if you want to fix your toaster, it's rational to have the truth about how it works and the cause of its problem. That's what it means to be a rational human being. Philosophy just applies being rational, being a human being, to that which is most significant. Our spiritual goals, destiny, how we think, and how we relate to ourselves and each other, and the human race and the planet. Balloons. Therefore, it is the most meaningful, it is the most important thing we can do, philosophy. So, where do we get that logos? Well, we talked about that counterattack to philosophy, but fortunately, not all books that were written from authors who were sharing in the logos, who were developed along that ladder, who had a high level of nous and logos and dianoia. Not all of that was burnt away by the Latins, by the Romans, by the Nazis, by the fascists. The counterattack played out in humanity. So fortunately, we have some that survived. Those are the books of Plato and the words of Socrates. Socrates is recognized as the father of Western thought, the godfather of philosophy, you might want to call him. But he is someone who talked openly about the logos. And in his work, he talked about having climbed that ladder and gave us material that we could use to apply ourselves to play the game and figure out these questions and these answers for our own development. Socrates was one of those cats. At the end of his life, he pointed out, hey, I've done this as I've lived the right life. I've completed my work here. And he lays it out for us. So we have those books because those books the works of Plato. Of course, there are other people. Plato, so within the lineage, philosophy itself, we could call it the perennial philosophy, the parent philosophy, the true philosophy. We have the earliest writings of someone named Xenophanes. We only have a few passages from him, and then he taught someone named Parmenides at around 400 BC, let's say. Parmenides taught Socrates. Socrates taught Plato. Plato started to write the stuff down. Socrates didn't, unfortunately. He started the academy. And of course, there was 1,000 years of study of the Logos that followed in the academy before it was burnt to the ground, and by those who wanted to replace understanding and knowledge with blind obedience with authority called faith. Believe us because we say so. And if you read the text, you will be burnt yourselves. You'll be murdered. You have to just believe us. And oh, that's good. We call that a virtue. It's good to have faith. Faith in what? In what I tell you. Where did you get it? Shut up. It's very irrational. But it will feel, if you grew up in a tradition like that, it will feel like it's the right thing to do. Which is what takes us back to the virtues. To play this game, you need a certain amount of courage to do what your learning is saying is true, even though your problems say it's not. It will feel comfortable to do the bad thing, to do what you're familiar with. Comfortable, familiar, used to. You have a way of being. You've already developed a masked way of dealing with the world in that kind of tradition. So it requires courage to follow the truth until you've seen it completely, until you've integrated it. Then, of course, the virtue of courage changes. There's a kind of leveling up of the virtues, but courage is one of them. Temperance, or keeping your cool, managing the desires that take you, desire your shadow. I really like beating up on that kid because it makes me feel like a big man. No. Even though you desire it, your Logos through philosophy is showing you that's actually harmful. To follow what the Logos is saying, what your learning is saying, is a virtue called temperance or sound-mindedness, even-temperedness. And of course, there are the other two, wisdom, we'll get into, justice, functioning in this way at all times. We will learn more about them as we get into the texts. So, the texts we're going to be reading on this channel. Of course, your dreams also are created through the Logos, sharing the Logos. So the more we learn about the Logos from reading these texts without interpretation, which means we're not racing through them the way an academic would. So he's, look at my big bookshelf, therefore I'm the smart one. I know. We read it many times. We repeat it many times. There's a Chinese saying, to master a text, read it 100 times. That's the kind of level of reading we need of the Logos, because every time we go back, we will have leveled up on our ladder. So we have the leveling up sound effect, because it's the quest. It's the archetype of all video games, of all movies. It's the actual quest, the meaningful, true quest. So every time we go back to the text, we will have ourselves leveled up. We will see the text in a new way. We will see more, we'll make more connections. It will open us up again. So we look at Plato's texts because they share in the Logos and we read it carefully. So we might spend a whole 4 hours on one word or one line or one page. Very different from when I was at school, when you get a pizza, like when I was a kid, you read a book, you get a free pizza voucher. So if you could race through 10 books, that's 10 pizzas. We don't do it. That's not true philosophy. Because we want to read without interpretation, with sustained focus, hunting for questions, looking for keywords that should be there but aren't. Why? Is that a puzzle? Is that a way that the author is communicating with us? So as we go through this puzzle-solving quest, we're also learning on how to become puzzle creators ourselves, how to be good authors. I often reference in this series Christopher Nolan, because Christopher Nolan and a few other filmmakers write in this way. There is the story question, like how will this character solve this problem? There are other hidden questions within the movie that you have to watch it a few times before you discover are there. You have to discover the questions and the answers. So that's how Plato writes, by the way. That's how our dreams are communicated to us. You have to also discover the questions. Is there anything that stands out as not fitting? Wonder why it's there. Or something that should be there that isn't? Or did it go in a weird direction for some reason? Or did he start an analogy? This is like this, just as this is like this, is like this, is like this. He gave us 2 terms up here, but 4 terms here. What is, if that's an analogy, what are the missing terms? Just like in a video game. So that's what we'll be doing in our channel. We'll be pulling out Platonic texts, following the logos, learning the logos as we go, learning the dialectic, learning what dianoia is, learning what nous is, learning what ousia is. So these key terms are starting points. All the way through our journey, we'll be learning more and more about them. So just take them as a question. Take these terms that might sound weird, take them as a question. Because our quest is to figure out what they mean. And in doing so, we're opening ourselves up to the direct experience of them. So that's what we're going to be doing in our channel. Reading together. Sharing our thoughts, sharing our questions, sharing our insights, sharing our experiences. And if we have higher experiences or enlightenment experiences, we keep going. There's a ladder to this. So hey, you might pass a Buddhist on the way, and then past a Taoist, and then past a Hindu mystic, and then past a Christian mystic maybe, and then past a Sufi mystic. Stages on the ladder, climbing the mountain. The true intellectual and spiritual quest. The most important thing we can do as ourselves as individuals. To learn what we need to remove our problems and reach our highest goals. Remove ourselves from the chains of inevitable fate, reach our highest destiny. What we need to solve problems also collectively in our world. We need to share it with our friends. That's why I'm doing this channel, to share it with as many people as possible. You don't have to. This used to be a mystic, an esoteric tradition, special rites and things. You have to show yourself to be, ready for the logos, or have done work in the logos, or be of the sort of person who can approach this with integrity and not just simply rail against it because it's not what you're used to. But we don't have time to keep this esoteric. Humanity doesn't have time. We have the technology, the nuclear weapons to end our human race. And the way capitalism going as well, we're destroying the planet we're on. Our job is to turn that around personally and collectively, which is nothing other than going back to where we left off. Picking up the game. You can say humanity is Homo sapien, man the thinker. Another way of talking about humanity is Homo ludens, man the player. And philosophy is the only game in town. It's the best game in town. It's the noblest game. This is the game that I'm encouraging you to play, that I'm playing myself, and I'm encouraging you to join me if you want to. If you're interested, if you're curious, please join us. This is the introduction. The first thing we're going to get into is Plato's Parmenides, which is Socrates, the big dog. At the start of his life as a philosopher, he comes in, he meets Parmenides, 350 BC, let's say. I'm not very good with dates, but it's around that time. Comes in, and we're going to relate to him probably. Because most people are kind of new to philosophy. We think of it as opinions, or we think of it in terms of the physical language, the language we were brought up in. Socrates is going to have a similar sort of problems. Parmenides is going to relate to him in a certain way that might benefit him. So we can learn from both. So Parmenides, the start of the journey, is where we're going to start. And as we go, we'll jump into other texts. And if the community grows and wants to do other things, we can explore different ways, because philosophy is sharing in the logos. We look to share in the logos. And the more we understand in the logos, the more we can apply it to ourselves, our highest ideas. The most important questions that we can ask. Hey, if you wake up in a video game, what would you ask? Where did I come from? Where am I going? And what should I be doing while I'm here? That's us. That's what would make us rational. The three big questions we're in a collective agreement to ignore. Philosophy doesn't ignore them. We ask them. Where do we come from? Where will we go after this life? And what should we do while we're here? So these are the questions that we apply the Logos to. So we go from discovering the Logos, wondering about the Logos, sharing in the Logos when we apply it to ourselves so we can follow the Logos. What is philosophy? Following the Logos. So, exciting stuff. I'm very grateful for the people who have participated in chat, who have subscribed to the channel already, who are sharing in the videos. Yeah, I'm very grateful to share this quest with others and play the noblest game, be a part of the best game in town, the most meaningful, the quest we actually desire the most and the most important. So I hope to see you next time. I hope you enjoy this channel. Any comments, please leave them below. Any questions, any feedback, any suggestions. We also have a Discord channel you're welcome to join. And I should be posting the texts we read as we go. But that's an introduction to the channel. Hope that sounds fun, and I hope to see you next time.